All right, cool. Well, the Brolosophy podcast is back, and we're here with Peter Drew. So, Peter, thanks for coming in. You're in Melbourne for the weekend?
Yeah, just for the weekend.
Cool. All right, so Peter is an artist who's come into some sort of what would you call it? Come into some sort of renown
Yeah.
since the
Notoriety, infamy.
notoriety since and it's the Real Australians Say Welcome. That's probably where it started. That campaign. All right, cool. Well, Peter, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and how you came to, political art or art.
Well, I make posters. Most people would recognise the Real Australians Say Welcome poster project or the Aussie posters, which are archival photographs of people who applied for exemptions to the White Australia policy. I stick them up on the street so people might recognise those posters, and it just says Aussie underneath. Mm-hmm. And I've been sticking up those posters around the country for a few years now. And I'm interested in Australian identity, what I like about Australian identity and what I don't like about it, how we can change it, and how art can help do that. And but I don't I don't really consider myself I don't actually like a lot of political art, and I sort of came to making political art in a very apprehensive way. So it's kind of odd in a way that I find myself making a lot of art which people see as being overtly political. Yeah. I I can understand how people dislike my posters, but also I can understand how people might like my posters too much. I think
there's problems for you on both ends of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just and so I like it's. I'll always jump at the opportunity to have a conversation about it, because then you find that there's a lot of middle ground which people can agree on. And it's not until you're talking, you can't really do that with a poster. A poster just says, "This is what I think."
Yeah, that's right. You need to grab attention and be worthwhile to spend 3 seconds to look at and understand a poster.
Yeah, but it's meant to be there as the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good way to put it. Before we dive into all that stuff that you mentioned, tell us a little bit about your background. Like, how you were obviously pretty artistic as a kid. You come from an artistic family.
A little bit, not massively. I mean, my posters aren't particularly artistic. They're pretty
not Rembrandts.
Yeah. My dad was an art teacher.
Oh yeah.
But he was never sort of super enthusiastic or encouraging about art. It was something that I loved doing in school, but he always sort of discouraged it in a way. Well, didn't
discourage it as a career.
Yeah, because it's not. Who can make a living as an artist?
Yeah.
So it was. I sort of dropped it halfway through school and then picked it up again, sort of during uni. And I started uni studying commerce, to become an accountant. And so, I think that's pretty good evidence that I had no idea who I was at that point in my life.
No one does, do they?
Well, I don't know.
33, I'm still figuring it out.
Well, sometimes you meet people that are in their sort of early 20s and they know exactly what they're doing, and it's like, I just feel like, fuck you. Yeah,
but the joke is that they actually really don't.
Yeah.
And they'll change. We all change what we really are set out to do. No one gets to 22 years old and finds their life's... Well, maybe there are
some lucky people.
Some lucky people, for sure. But, I mean, I think it's quite natural to float through things and find different passions and change what you want to do. And I think there's anything wrong with that. But, yeah, so you were... so you got back into doing some art when you were going through university. So... Yeah. And then what about So, do you make your living through being an artist?
No, it's
these days?
It's a bunch of things. I make videos for people, so that's how I make most of my rent and stuff like that. But the poster projects more or less pay for themselves. People buy the posters from me online, so I don't need to apply for grants from government bodies or anything like that. And the money goes back into traveling around and making the posters and sticking them up. And it's sort of, I didn't really plan it that way. It's just sort of grown organically, and I've realized, well, there's kind of a split between my art practice and me making money other ways to live off. And I'm sort of comfortable with that because I don't have to go, oh, how can I squeeze some money out of my art projects?
Yeah.
Which would be, I don't know, there's a conflict there between art and commerce.
Yeah, for sure. Even me, just when you said it, I was just like, oh, I had the thought of it. It's not how art should be, really.
Well, I don't know. Like, I used to think, well, that's kind of silly. Like, why isn't art just like anything else? Like, but it's different. It feels different. Like, it's sort of because it's about curiosity and trying to figure out the world. If it's that and simultaneously how to make money from the world, it just feels like a conflict. I don't really know how to explain it.
Yeah, I don't either. But my gut turned when you said it. I understand the conflict. I think a lot of people probably do. So. Right, cool. So you came from an artistic family and obviously, took that through university and stuff. So when did you get your passion for telling stories about politics through art or trying to raise these conversations and bring them to the forefront? Where did that all come from?
Well, it wasn't until 2013 I was studying overseas. My wife and I were living in Glasgow. And living overseas, you suddenly become Australian because everyone goes, oh, Peter, the Australian guy. And you go, oh, I guess I am Australian.
Yeah, the kangaroo rider. Foster's drinker.
Yeah, you just sort of... the identity gets sort of forced upon you in some sense. And I thought, well, what do I like about Australia? What don't I like? And at that time, the federal election was on, and both major parties were promising to stop the boats. And that phrase just was just, really strong in all the rhetoric. And I thought it's kind of a slightly absurd phrase, but it's sort of like from a nation of immigrants, like that desire to stop the boats just seemed, it lacked a sense of history, I guess. And so I just started making political posters, although I don't really like political art because it's so sure of itself. There's been a sort of a struggle with that throughout, since I've started.
Yeah, I think art has to sit on one side of the fence. You seem to be kind of nearly apologising for the art that you create, but you can't have a poster that's like, hey, here's two sides of an argument that I'd love you to, understand both parts of and then form your own conclusion. You need to bring emotion to people.
Yeah, no, you're right.
You can't be in the middle. You can't be any grey area.
Yeah, because the sit on the fence is it's the same thing as just not making the poster at all. Here are the two halves. I'm not sure which way to go. Actually, I've decided not to make the poster. And
yeah, that's right. No, well, I was watching your TEDx from Adelaide. This morning, I watched it. I watched it when we first reached out, and then I watched it again this morning before the show. And so, when you started you were in Glasgow, and then is it true that the story is you went to London and you made the famous first Australian poster about Stop the Boats? Is that right?
Yeah. So I made a poster in the style of a sort of 19th century poster, and had a picture of a ship from the First Fleet, which I took from an old painting, and it says. Australia says stop the boats to avoid Aboriginal genocide, stop Great Britain's illegal migration to Australia.
Yeah.
And so I went down to London and stuck up a bunch of those. And they were very popular. People responded to them. And I thought, well, maybe there's something here that I can sort of pursue. Although looking back at it, what I do this with all of the posters I make, I sort of go, well, what worked? Why did it work? But what doesn't it do? What don't I like about it? And with that poster, it's kind of easy in a way to make those, because it captures a dark irony within Australia's identity, but it doesn't really offer any sort of solution, or it doesn't offer any middle ground. It's kind of just sort of laughing at the darkness of Australia's identity, and it's kind of easy to do that. It's very easy to just sort of go, well, that's fucked up. Let's go do something else.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of spurred me on to sort of make the next project better.
Well, that was certainly when I saw that poster, that was certainly drawing a line in the sand. That's a very there's no grey area in that poster. It's even nearly calling Australians, well, your forefathers are all genocidal, which is it's a big kick in the guts for Australians, but I really loved it. I thought it was great because I think, as you said, we've got such a short memory. Australia has a very short history and it has a very dark history, and especially considering the fact that we are all immigrants. So what was it about the fact that, have you always, these people seeking asylum, and when you kept hearing stop the boats, is that something that you've always known about, the way that we treat asylum seekers? Because I particularly don't. I've travelled all over the world. I'm pretty grounded, I feel like. I've seen how everyone, all the other sides of the world live, all the other cultures. But I don't really know too much about the way that we do treat asylum seekers. Was that something that you knew before?
No, it's something that I didn't know very... I mean, I think it's always been in the background of Australian politics, especially since sort of the Tampa, the kids overboard type stuff in the Howard years. But I didn't sort of pay it that much attention. And to be honest, I'm not sort of that... I don't think about it on a daily basis just because it's so grim.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, my art isn't really about government policy. It's more about the emotion which those policies are trying to service in a way. Like the assumptions that are out there within the populace about what it means to belong, what it means to be Australian, because the policy is there to sort of service those fears in some ways. So that's why none of my posters really talk directly about government policy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I just sort of follow it as I guess most Australians do. I've heard about what's happening to the Medivac bill and all that sort of stuff, but it's not really my work isn't really about that directly.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say that your work is trying to do? Like, if you're going out and raising awareness and putting posters up all over Australia and all over the world, like, what are you trying to... you said there's a feeling. You mentioned before that there's
the emotion,
the emotion.
The fear that is always there and directed towards outsiders, that there's a feeling that we're the people that belong and the people that don't look like us are the people that don't belong.
Us versus them.
Yeah, and that's the simplest way of putting it. Obviously, you can look at it in a more nuanced way in that the people who fit in with our society and obey our laws are the ones that fit in, and the ones that don't need to be excluded. But sometimes the easiest way to see those people is they look different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually the way it gets played out. And I just think Australians... I mean, I like to think of Australians as being very welcoming, and I think we are. That's when we're at our best.
Mm-hmm.
And so addressing the fear and trying to, I guess, just help people not be as afraid and to find their courage.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what the poster is trying to do on a sort of gut level, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, I have a real problem with nationalism. I think it's a silly concept. I think the us versus them that we naturally do as human beings is one of the worst things in our makeup. We have to find them, and we have to know who us are. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before with guests we've brought it up, but I actually think it sounds silly, and the listeners would have heard me talk about it before, but I actually think the best thing that could happen to us would be finding intelligent life in the solar system, or having an asteroid hurtling towards us, Armageddon style, where we all have to band together. But anyway, so I've lost my train of thought there. But
you were just smiling at the thought of an asteroid in the air.
I was thinking of Bruce Willis
solution.
Yeah. But I think nationalism is quite a silly concept. I think that we all are, we're all human beings, and we should really help each other. But it isn't that simple. But Australia. So considering the fact that we have a very large nation and lots and lots of space, and we do seem to portray that we're welcoming to people and outsiders, as we would call them, I guess. But what are we at our worst? You said at our best we are welcoming, but what are we at our worst? What is You know,
Well,
what is the dark history, and where are we still at in underlying racism and so forth?
I don't think Australians are any different to anyone else in that we have the capacity for bigotry and racism. I don't like. There are silly ways to pass this up and try to declare. To ask questions like, "Is Australia a racist country?" It's kind of a stupid thing to say. I mean, all people have the capacity for racism and bigotry, and Australia has a history that demonstrates that, because all people are at a base level, we're animals, and we have that desire to just sort of to expel the other and to protect the in group. And yeah, Australian history shows that. But so I just think, sorry, I've just dissolved the question.
It's fine. That's fine.
I'm not sure making sort of grand statements about what Australia's identity is. It can be done in a negative way on both sides. To declare ourselves completely good and righteous is just as false as to say, well, there are these impurities in our history when Australians have done terrible things. Therefore, the entire Australian project, to throw it out, knock down the border. It only leaves.
Get on a boat, go back to England.
Yeah, exactly. It's nonsense, really.
Yeah,
and
it's not a thing that we could do.
No, and it's motivated by a kind of childish desire for perfection and purity, which has all kinds of negative manifestations. So I think what I try to do with all my posts is find some sort of negotiated compromise, and that's true in, say, my Aussie posters, which features a Muslim man who lived, worked and died in Australia, but the declaration at the bottom of the poster is Aussie. And so the vast majority of the people that like the posters are people that see it as, yes, we'll make this, we'll be welcoming to the people that others want to exclude, but there are also people that just like the poster because it's using nationalism in an aspirational way, saying, well, why should we want to belong to this thing called Australia, because it's inherently corrupt because of this history we have. And so what I try to do with all my projects is piss off the people on both extremes, and once you're sort of getting criticised by the Puritans on both sides of the debate, that's when I feel like I'm doing the right thing, because it's sort of if you do things in the right way, those people, the extremists, they expose themselves. They make themselves look silly by saying their absurd arguments, and the people in the middle, all they have to do is just look at what's happening and go, oh, right, there are assholes on both sides. I think I'll meet everyone else in the middle. And so that's what I try to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I like your point about not painting everything in a dystopian, super negative picture. Trying to provide a solution or provide a narrative that can be really positive. Like, the examples of the the different Australians with different backgrounds that you highlight in all of your posters, because I think one of the things that I think is a real juxtaposition is the fact that I think racism carries itself on through the narrative a lot of the time when it shouldn't have to, or when I wish it wouldn't. For example, blackface, which is obviously, blackface is extremely racist. But I remember an example of, and I'm interested in your thoughts, but I remember an example of, there was a kid in Frankston. You mentioned you were going to Frankston later on today. Yeah. So this kid was from Frankston. I have lots of family in Frankston. I played football in Frankston for a bit. I'm from further down the Mornington Peninsula, but Frankston's a pretty low socioeconomic area. Yep. And I remember there was a kid who got... he was an 18-year-old kid playing local senior football, and he went to a rap and R&B night, and he dressed as Akon. So he just painted himself black. He went blackface, effectively. And this kid was smashed from pillar to post. Herald Sun, he was all over, inherent racism. What's wrong with Australia? Blah blah blah. All the news outlets and so on and so forth. And it came out. I thought it was rough anyway, because I didn't see that it was. It didn't seem like it was meant to be hurt anyone's feelings or that it was racist. But it came out like 7 days later that the kid had never heard of blackface before. You know, so it's the narrative is, and that, you know, I just have such an issue with that. I mean, it has to get to a point. We have to understand our history, but we have to be forgiving enough in certain scenarios to not propagate.
No, but the thing is,
of the us versus them. What do you think?
But if we forgive those people, then it's only by just crushing them like that we can destroy racism forever. Like that's kind of what motivates those massive pylons, is that we found. What's really going on there is that all these people that know deep down in their hearts that they are also imperfect. They see someone else just flagrantly being ignorant and, dressing up in blackface or doing something which can be construed as offensive. All these other people get this chance to go, right, let's take it all out on them. It's kind of, they're raging against their own imperfectibility, really.
Yeah.
And the world's always been like that. We're not going to be we can't sort of stop it from happening. But I just think it does seem like it's sort of getting worse in some ways. And obviously, the thing to say is that, it's the way the media's changed. Social media allows all these people to pile on at once. But that desire for moral purity and to scapegoat someone else's stupid behaviour. That's always been with us. It's just that now you can jump on some kid for doing something stupid at a party, and the whole country can get into it.
It just seemed really sad to me, because this kid is now painted as a racist, and the narrative of us versus them is fired right up. It's on the front pages of the Herald Sun, and Ricky Gervais has talked about it before, and I'm a big fan of Ricky Gervais, and I don't know why he brought it up or why it was on topic when he was asked a question, and he sits on the same side of the fence as me in this regard, where he's like, it's intent, like if he's not intending to be,
and you can't measure intent, like it's kind of
at what
it's
point,
unquantifiable. It's sort of inside your own mind.
Yeah, that's right. At what point can we say, hey, we're all one person, and this guy's not trying to be racist to anyone for something that happened 100 years ago? Like, let's just go about our days and not worry about the racism part of this, like not bring up. I don't know. It is, but I understand the cultural significance of blackface. So it is a tough position. Like I remember with the kid in Frankston, Nick Natanui, West Coast Eagles player. So he's got dark skin. I remember he was asked about it, and he said, "Oh, I used to absolutely love it when all the kids at the games would paint themselves black like me, and then once I realized about blackface, I just found that it was really sad that they hadn't been educated well enough in their." That was the quote that he came out with, and I was like, hang on a sec,
yeah, how did that flip? Like,
you didn't even know about it. I just think it's like I don't.
Well, it's not part of our culture, is it? It's an American thing of minstrels and so it's people try to
propagate. I feel like they try and propagate racism. Not propagate it, but try and...
I get what you're saying, though.
Raise because it was in this particular instance, there was no racist... Well, let's give the guy the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, well, hypothetically, I mean, you can look at it two different ways. That maybe it was purely like those kids dressing up at the game that you mentioned just before. Maybe it was all just out of love. The intent was purely... wanting to identify with somebody that they idolized. So there's that possibility. The other possibility is that it was just pure hatred, and that's the way that person expressed that. Both, and how can you possibly measure it or prove it either way? And so the solution culturally at the moment seems to be, well, we don't know. So let's just stop those things. And what that does is it creates this sort of cultural boundary and subordinates culture to politics. And we actually need culture in order to... that's what art can do, is show us that these political boundaries are ultimately not real, and that we are all humans, and that culture is a way of sort of communicating across political boundaries. And so the more we sort of take the power away from culture and say that, only people of color can make people of color culture, and white people can only make white people culture. As soon as you start thinking that way, culture becomes less powerful and less able to talk across the aisle or across the political boundary. So I don't know. I'm an artist, so I will always come down on the side of culture and its ability to transcend those boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's the artist's responsibility to try to find the cracks in the argument and to sort of to get over those boundaries. Because otherwise, if we can only make culture that's for the people that look like us, and they can only make their culture, if it comes down to that, we're fucked, because we can't communicate, we can't sort of show each other that we're human anymore. And yeah, I don't want to live in a world that's like that. So this is not me advocating for blackface. I'm just saying, I
can see the headlines tomorrow after the show's released. Peter Drew, racist. No,
but you got to find ways around it. And there are things which just become radioactive and fine. But the human imagination never gives up. It's so boundless that it will just find a way around, and that will just continue to happen. I don't really sort of I just think culture is so powerful that it will just keep finding ways of breaking the rules. And
no, for sure. And I think one of the interesting things is art seems to transcend culture and the cultural narrative that's being told. So for example, it's a lot harder for a politician or a public figure or a celebrity or a sports star or something to go out and draw a line in the sand and say, this is where I sit and create a narrative, compared to an artist. And I mean an artist in the way that you do your art, or an artist as in, and I use this example because I'm just I've seen more of it, but comedians, for example, and musicians, but particularly comedians. Like, some of my favourite comedians are quite, they're not quite political in one, like, left or right, but kind of political satirists, I guess. Like George Carlin, for example. Like, if you watch George Carlin, are you familiar with George Carlin? Yeah. So George Carlin, I've only really watched all of his later stuff in his older years. White, balding, hair tied back, white beard, George Carlin. So, but he was a very vanilla comedian for when he was the first 20 years of his career, and then he became more of a political satirist, and people just absolutely loved it. But he was so smart, and he could break through the barriers, I guess, and tell the stories and show the ridiculousness of the way that we do things. Because realistically, we're so hypocritical, we're so we have so many oversights, we're so silly in what we do day to day. And I think it is the job of art, in whatever shape it is, whether it's with a brush, whether it's with a microphone, whether it's on stage telling jokes. I think it's a really important. It's like the jester at court, hundreds and thousands of years ago, or maybe they didn't have jesters thousands of years ago. But
it's the same thing, though. I get what you're saying.
Yeah. I think it's hugely important.
Yeah, because it's the person that stands up and says the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
I love comedy, and it's funny, isn't it, how that form of person standing up on stage with a microphone, it seems to have become more powerful and interesting and crucial over the last 10, 15 years. It's, I don't know, that position is more needed because there's just so much noise, and there's something sort of so honest and real, because when you're standing on stage and just talking with a microphone, there's no hiding, it's sort of just one person and their thoughts. And the comedy that I like is the person that sort of tries to say the right thing and then goes and says the wrong thing, and sort of the two coexist.
Yeah.
And it's such a relief to people, because everybody has those thoughts. They explore things they're not meant to in their mind. And until we sort of talk about that, you can't have that catharsis, because otherwise you're just locked in your own head thinking, should I be thinking these things? And when you're not allowed to discuss that stuff, that's when, I don't know, I think that's when people start to, things become toxic or, sometimes it's like just by getting it out, things evaporate and you don't need to think about it anymore.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, I remember Kevin Kelly talking about the futurist Kevin Kelly, and he talked about 12 I've got his book over there. He talks about 12 trends for the future, and one of them is breaking the algorithm. So the reason I say that is because you said how everything, racism or, people choosing one side of the fence and really leaning in is probably worse than ever. And I think it's because of the algorithm. We're fed via Instagram, Facebook, mainly YouTube. We're fed more of what we like. And if we sit really, if we're really left or really right, or we're really this or really that politically or ideologically, then we're going to be fed more and more and more and more of that. So Dave Chappelle's recent comedy special, it got rave reviews from 50% of the audience, greatest comedy special of all time, and then it got, oh my God, Dave Chappelle, what a racist, homophobic, misogynist arsehole.
Like the ratio between the fan reviews was super high, and then there's like all the like Guardian articles were like, well, it's time for us. Sorry, we're going to have to cancel Dave Chappelle.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. But I think it's just such a shock to people to hear the other side, and because we get fed so much, if you lean right politically, then, if you have someone come out and just absolutely smash the right wing in a stand-up show, it's going to be a real shock to you because you're just not used to hearing and seeing it laid out like that. And Dave was the other way around. I guess it was more like, giving it to the left and the Me Too culture and so forth. But
he railed against the right just as hard.
Yeah.
I mean, he hates Trump, and it's so... Yeah, but it does seem like the discourse is getting more divided. I don't know whether it is or whether it's just the way we communicate is, all those thoughts that used to just be unexpressed and now the algorithm can collect them all together and create these enormous bubbles. But I mean, I don't really know the solution there. I think that...
Isn't it some sort of a Fair News Act? Remember, I don't know much about it, but I know that back in the day, newspapers had to print a certain amount of, liberal and a
Right.
certain amount of left and a certain amount of right. Whereas, and this is what Kevin Kelly mentioned, was there needs to be an evening up of the algorithms, because you can go down a rabbit hole for... Some people watch 10 hours of YouTube straight on a Friday night sitting at home, and it's one thing, For me, I watch heaps of YouTube because I've got Apple TV. I watch too much YouTube. But I just go down UFC, NBA, and Joe Rogan podcast, So I'm all right. I'm safe. But yeah, you get fed the same thing over and over and over. And I think it's just going to create that stronger stance in your head. Whereas Kevin Kelly's idea was, he thinks it will get so bad in the future that there'll have to be somebody will have to step in and say, right, YouTube, you have to have, instead of your algorithm saying, hey, here's 4 more of the videos that you'll absolutely love on, whatever topic you're looking at.
It forces you to watch something.
Well, it's like, hey, here's have you ever thought about checking out this particular video in relation to these 3 videos that you've watched? Which is pretty, that's not probably ever going to happen, but that's kind of, something like that would be healthy, and it's kind of what we need, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, I think about my consumption of social media, and I follow as much stuff that I really don't like as stuff that I do, in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's entertaining to to read and watch the things that are not so much opposed, but just and to try to find the middle ground between them. Because otherwise you're just, soak in a bath of your own opinions. And I mean, that's kind of, I know what you mean about the YouTube binges, because you just get fired up because all that stuff, especially the politically geared stuff, is about gawking at the other side, sort of setting up a straw man of the other side and going, oh, it doesn't make any sense. And then they'll move on to the next one and go, oh, look, this is another thing they did which is stupid. Oh, they're idiots. And it's, you can sort of dish that crap up to people endlessly, and both sides do it, and they sort of develop an audience that sort of goes, yeah, the other side, they're idiots. And I don't know, it's kind of, there are a lot of people, these sort of political entrepreneurs that do that, and it's ultimately insulting to their audience, because it's kind of dumb. Like, trying to find a middle ground is so much harder, but it's ultimately where sort of a sense of peace lies, in some sort of compromise between both sides. But yeah, I feel best of all when I just go, you know what, I'm just going to not look at my fucking phone today, you know? Because, you know, I hate the feeling that you get at the end of the day when you go, oh, why do I feel like shit? Oh, I've got to spend too much time on my phone, or I've just spent hours looking at YouTube shit. But if you just a day which I've gone, you know what, I haven't used it much today, you just feel better.
100%.
And so I try to do that, but it's hard because that's where everything's happening.
Oh my God. Where's my phone? Oh, it's over there. I had my housemate controlled my controlled my passcode on my phone, so I got him to lock me out of all my apps, and I didn't have the code for it, so I couldn't get into any apps. But now I've got it again. He moved away, and I've got and now I'm just like this all day, every day. But I tried to not be able to use my phone, apart from like I could use Uber in the bank and, you know, stuff like that, after 7:30 p.m. and before 7:30 a.m. And then I was trying to shorten that window. I was going all right with it. And then now I wake up at 5:45 and I get straight on my phone. It's terrible.
It's like, it's hard to get going in the morning until you're looking at an app. But yeah.
But that's a whole another story. So, so with everything that you know about, I mean, you say that you watch as much opposing ideas and follow as many opposing accounts or whatever on your social medias. That's probably because you're a smart guy, and because of the field that you're in, you have to understand what's going on narrative-wise on both sides, I would say, and that's really good. That's really good. But knowing what you know, and particularly regarding Australia, what would you like to see happen in Australia and change over the next 5, 10, 20 years? I'm sure you've thought long and hard about it. You've got a very, got a stance on.
To be honest, I mean, I in some ways I don't. I mean, all of my art is really motivated by curiosity to seeing how people react, not sort of telling. Even like a statement like "Real Australians say welcome." I made it ultimately because I want to find out whether real Australians do say welcome. It's not my desire to change the world as much as it is a desire to find out what the world is. And I think that's really the difference between art and propaganda. I think what I make is art disguised as propaganda because there's this amazing hunger for propaganda at the moment. People want these political certainties. So I don't think about policy and how to fix the country or how to fix the world. I really think that I think most about is just personal psychology, how people and especially myself, how I can go about my life in a way which is beneficial to me and the people around me, and sort of in concentric circles, my community, my city, the country, the world. Because that's something everyone can do. They can all, because you look at the entire world and how to fix Australia, how to fix the climate. These problems are too big, and it's so.
You got to start in your own backyard.
No, absolutely, and you've always got control over that. And ultimately, that's all you really have control over. So that's what I try to focus on. So that's my way of completely avoiding that question.
You've avoided them well. I'm trying to load up with some real heavy hitting stuff here.
I think, I know it must be frustrating, but I think that
it's not frustrating at all. I'm only joking. I'm all good, mate.
I just think that I'm
like, fuck. Oh, you walk out the door. Fuck that guy.
I think that it's quite possible for people to get the wrong impression about me, that I am very sort of politically minded, but I just it's just not really what I sort of see it as a trap of being. It's so much like, because I wrote this book, Poster Boy, and it's very much about why I did the poster projects and what I've discovered about myself. And I think that a lot of people get into politics. This is me explaining what I did. I got into political art for therapeutic reasons in a lot of ways. A lot of people do this. They go, I want to avoid all this shit inside. I'm going to do that by trying to fix the world. Because the internal problems, when it comes to family, relationships, your own imperfectibility, that stuff's super hard. So hard, in fact, that fixing the whole world seems easier.
Yeah.
And it not only... It's sort of more socially rewarding as well. You get more virtue points by taking on the world rather than going, you know what, I've just been fixing up my own shit. People aren't going to sort of give you as much praise for that. So there's just so many incentives to avoid the internal problems and to seek out external validation. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in why that seems to be harder to avoid now than it was before, the internet, really.
Yeah, interesting. So your own backyard. So talk to me more about that. So you say you had issues that you needed to address. Like, was it like childhood stuff? Was it some stuff in your day to day that you're not happy with at the moment, or like? Mostly,
I mean, there's a lot of family stuff. A lot of the book is about family things that were avoided, and just an inability to deal with emotion in some ways, for various reasons that I go into in the book. But my family, we really didn't discuss things. There was no forgiveness. There was no people saying I'm sorry, and the other side saying that's all right, I forgive you. Although that's not ever really expressed explicitly, there was just this. That mechanism was missing. People would have conflicts, they'd avoid one another, and then they'd just move on. So I just had to, I found becoming an adult, that was a skill I had to learn in my relationships with friends and partners especially. And I just think about that sort of, what would the world be like if we didn't have forgiveness? And it seems on the grand scale that's something that we are forgetting. We don't forgive people. We go, that person did the wrong thing. Cancel that person because they are impure. And because forgiveness is kind of traditionally it's a theological concept. It's a spiritual concept of that person has done wrong, but they've admitted it, and we're all imperfect, so we forgive them. And if we lose that mechanism within a society, we're fucked.
Yeah, 100%.
100% fucked.
Because we're all dirtbags at the end of the day. We all fuck everything up.
Yeah, and it's even if your external behavior seems perfect, everyone's got thoughts in their mind that are fucked up. and I think the more that you try to have a perfect exterior, eventually the thoughts will rebel. Because that's a part of you too. Even if you don't admit it to yourself, it's just bubbling away there. And so, there needs to be some release valve, and that's art, that's comedy, that's these things that allow people to go, oh, we're fucked, we're fucked up. And then it gets out and you sort of, and you do it together, you sort of see each other, oh, we're all fucked up. It feels fantastic.
Yeah, let's have a beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's all be friends. Yeah, it's empathy, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
To the human race.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just, I try. I'd like to do that more for my posters, but I mean, ultimately, that's what we all want from art and culture, is that feeling of shared empathy. And it's interesting when that happens through people admitting their faults. So that's what I go into a lot in the book, is trying to sort of do a real deep dive into my past and why, because it's a weird thing. What I do is a weird thing, traveling around the country, sticking up posters.
What do you do with yourself? Oh, I'm a poster boy.
Yes. Oh, you're one of those. Oh, there's only one. Oh, okay. You're weird.
That's right. Yeah. No, I stick up posters. Yeah. No, it is interesting. Yeah.
I had to just sort of go, why do I do this? And and the only way I could explain that was by thinking a lot about my past and family and all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Interesting. And have you had, throughout the whole process, you must have had some pretty rewarding conversations with people. You know, you've probably had some pretty hard conversations with certain people and certain but it must be rewarding to you, right? To have people come up and change their mind or open the conversation or open their eyes a little bit.
Yeah, they fit into a bunch of different patterns. I mean, a lot of it, the stuff that it always surprises me when I get messages from people who are sort of recent immigrants or asylum seekers saying that the posters have made them feel more welcome. And it's very sort of affecting when it happens because it's just unexpected, you know.
Must be a great feeling.
Well, it's good. It's so much better than because when I started, I was thinking, right, we're going to sort of get the polys. It's going to be about changing policy.
Hit them where it hurts.
And it was too big a goal for one person to really have. But that person-to-person interaction of, I've been living here for a short time. Your posters spoke to me. Thank you for doing that. That's that's so much more rewarding, and that's sort of definitely kept me going. Then there are the people that dislike the posters for various reasons, and the conflicts of have with people on the street, because that's very sort of in your face. Like online, you can sort of
say what you want, troll anyone.
Yeah, and then the nature of the conflict so much. It's so much easier to not have empathy for the person, but when you're in someone's face, it's such a weird mix of emotions because they're getting angry at you, but also you can see them getting guilty for getting angry at you. It's all happening at once. I've got a bunch of stories about that, which I sort of talk about in the book a lot. Then there are the interactions which are slightly more unexpected. That there's one I talk about in the book about a lady in it was near Potts Point, which was a sort of
inner Sydney,
wealthy area, and I was dressed in my gear, workwear, so I looked like someone who works on the street, and I was actually fixing up a poster that I stuck up a couple of days beforehand because the corner was peeling off, and she starts filming me on her phone and saying, "No, you don't. This neighborhood's wide enough, thanks very much." Like, she thought that I was taking the poster down.
Yeah, right.
And I just thought, fuck, this is like, I can't stop people from using my posters to assert the superiority of their class. Because I looked like a working class yob who was going to go, oh, fuck this poster.
Yeah.
And I think that's super interesting because there are actually perfectly legitimate reasons for wanting to limit immigration on economic grounds. Especially if you're at the bottom of the labour market, you don't want people coming overseas to take your jobs.
Yep.
And traditionally, the left has protected those people by saying, look, you're the members of unions, and we're going to protect your, because you can't. That doesn't work if you have limitless labour. If it's always, you can always sort of undercut those people at the bottom of the labour market. But anyway, now if people sort of try to express those views, it's almost impossible for them to express that without being accused of xenophobia, bigotry, and so I just think that's a shame. And meanwhile, it's very easy for people who are very well off to say, well, I'm welcoming of others, I cherish diversity. It becomes this way of asserting their class superiority. And so that's a really unfortunate political dynamic that sort of that's developed in this country.
It's not an easy thing to wrap your head around, the issues around everything that we've spoken about.
But
I really like your point as to focusing on, and I know we've got to get you out of here shortly.
Oh, do we? Sorry.
Focusing on the micro rather than the macro, and on an individual basis, because all these people that come up and thank you, it's probably a really positive thing for you. It's probably a real warm and fuzzy, and it probably makes you feel amazing. But on a scale, it's probably nothing on a scale compared to how amazing or how much better you've made them feel. You know, really, like think of being somewhere day to day, 24/7 and not feeling welcome. You know, feeling like an outsider, feeling like they're not, you know, it's a terrible, terrible feeling to wrap your head around. So,
well, I think that even if 99% of someone's life is all these people having peaceful, loving interactions, it's that one person that says, "Fuck off! You're never going to belong here." That will ruin your whole year, you know, because you start thinking that person is everyone.
Yeah.
They're just hiding it or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've never really had to have that. I mean, I've had awful interactions in my life, but it's never really being made to feel like you fundamentally don't belong for something that you can't change. So that, you know, it's un-Australian to do that to people. So yeah, and I try to focus on that sort of one-to-one sort of help that everyone can do. I mean, it's not just someone like me sticking up posters. Everyone making others feel welcome. It can have a net sort of accumulative benefit for everyone else. So yeah,
100%. All right, and in the next, you know, in the not too distant future, in the you know long term. Oh, I can't string my words together today.
One of my future plans is
what do you want to say? What do you want to do with yourself over the next, you know, 5, 10, 20 years with what you do?
With what I do, I am starting another book, which is about men and women, actually, which is, you know, something that I think about a lot. So quite different to the poster projects, and we haven't spoken about that at all today. But that's something I'm thinking about a lot and working on. I'm always going to make posters, and I think I'm always going to make posters about Australian identity. Mm-hmm. I really love the idea of being an old man, sort of mixing up the glue and going out and sticking up posters. Because the streets, it's always going to be there. There are always going to be streets and ugly walls, and so I love doing it. I just love the adventure and the interactions with people that love and hate my posters. So I think I'll never stop.
That's great. I
want to do other things as well. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, cool. All right, no worries. Well, Peter, before we wrap it up, where can people find you? Links to the books and websites, anything you want to plug. Where can people find you and learn more?
Well, my book Poster Boy is out everywhere now. You can find me at Peter Drew Arts on all the social media platforms. And look for my posters on the street.
Yeah, cool. All right, Peter Drew, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. Cool, and that's a wrap.